Welcome to the Vanderbilt Philosophy Interviews. I'm here with Kristin Boyce, and we're going to talk about your research, some of your teaching, and so on. Looking forward to it.
Me too.
All right. Kristin is an associate professor of the practice here at Vanderbilt. Before that, you were an associate professor at Mississippi State.
That's right.
And then before that, you did a postdoc at Stanford and a postdoc at Johns Hopkins in the humanities programs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Did your PhD at the University of Chicago.
That's right.
In philosophy.
Yeah.
An MA in religious studies.
Yes.
At Chicago.
Yes.
And before that, a Bachelor of Arts? Bachelor of Science?
Bachelor of Arts.
Bachelor of Arts in religious studies and mathematics at William...
Hobart and William Smith.
Hobart and William Smith, thank you. And so that's a great arc into this, into the discipline. What got you into philosophy?
Well, my path into philosophy was pretty circuitous. I didn't study it as an undergraduate at all. But I really loved to write, and I especially loved to write proofs. And so when I started thinking about applying to graduate school, I didn't want to keep going in math, but I wanted to study proofs and what proofs were. And so I applied to the Conceptual Foundations of Science program. This was my first effort to get into philosophy, which was unsuccessful because I had a whole lot of math. I had a really good math background. I'd done no philosophical writing. I had written a prose poem about my bodily experience of seeing the beauty of abstract algebra for the first time. And in my mind, that was the most important thing that I had ever written, because it was about what a proof can allow you to see. And so when they asked me for a writing sample, I sent them that, and they realized that I was not ideally suited to their academic program, but I had inadvertently told them exactly what I was interested in.
What
and in some ways so that was my first failure to get into philosophy.
A stumbling entrance, but nevertheless an entrance. I'm loving this vision of the idea of seeing the beauty of a proof, seeing the fittingness of a series of inferences. Can you tell me about what that experience is like? Can you put some words to that? You don't have to quote the poem.
Okay,
but
I can't quote the poem anymore. I saved it for like 15 years. I no longer have it. It wasn't, so I was much less, so I didn't experience, I of course, I knew that writing a proof was writing a series of inferences, but what really interested me was the way in which different paths to the same result could illuminate, not so much, so it could illuminate the conceptual world that the proof was tapping into. So I really did. Of course, truth. So this open questions about the relationship between truth and beauty, because of course truth is organizing the proof, but the bodily experience of seeing those conceptual connections was just one of the most powerful experiences of beauty that I had ever had.
So me saying then in the form of inferences is maybe the wrong way to capture that. You're seeing it as a kind of less a set of sort of stichomathetic little steps. You're seeing it as a kind of a conceptual whole.
Yes, yeah. That's a good way to put it, I think.
Wow. So in terms of this bringing together of a way of looking at truth and having a kind of aesthetic appreciation for that. That in some ways bridges a gulf. That's a sort of an age-old gulf between philosophy and art. between the aesthetics, between the true and the beautiful. The true and the beautiful should come together, but they often don't. And so tell me about how you're thinking about that gap and thinking about how to bridge that gap or how to mend the rift.
I mean, the primary way. I guess the primary way that I've tried to mend the rift is by going back to so within aesthetics there's a lot of attention to the ancient quarrel between philosophy and the arts, and often so I have, for various reasons, I think about going. So there are a lot of artists who have remained really interested in that ancient quarrel. Not so much philosophers, I think. I mean, it might be fair to say. I'm not sure. Even within, so I got really interested in philosophy and literature, but within philosophy and literature in the analytic tradition, there's no interest in a quarrel between, or very little interest in a quarrel. Martha Nussbaum gets things started by focusing on a quarrel, but the argument that she actually makes has always seemed to me to kind of sideline the idea of a quarrel, because it imagines that there are certain kinds of truths that a series of inferences can't capture, right? So there's the idea that the way that to bridge the gap is to say philosophy itself can't express all truths, so it's incomplete in its professional form. We need the arts to sort of map the region of truth completely, because there are some truths that exceed language or exceed, that could not be translated into formal logical notation, right? So, and that I don't like that idea of there being sort of philosophy and literature working together to completely map this this region of truths. So the way that I wanted to think about it is going back to this ancient quarrel, and in a weird way, my way back was Wilfrid Sellars, because I've always loved Sellers's one-word definition of philosophy as philosophers are interested in how things hang together in the broadest possible sense, right? And I think the arts are well described as helping things, or at least the arts that I'm really interested in are interested in helping things hang together. And at least as I think Plato himself was very interested in this, right? Philosophy, the kind of philosophical questioning he was interested in was a way of trying to help the parts of the soul hang together, and that in turn helped the parts of the city hang together. So I want to see, so my question is there still a kind of basic way that philosophy and the arts maybe work together to help things hang together now? And I feel like we're at a contemporary moment now where it suddenly looks like things don't hang together or might not keep hanging together. So what responsibility do we bear for helping things to hang together, not just studying how they do hang together?
Right. It's not just an explanatory or descriptive program. It's a prescriptive program, and maybe even doing its best to have some repair. So Plato,
yeah,
you invoked Plato, so we're gonna talk a little bit about it. So some of your work has been on both the symposium, but also interpretations of the symposium in art, and particularly dance. So tell me about this.
Well, I mean, and this kind of goes back to my interest in math, because I have, throughout my adult life, been very interested in the art form of ballet. And ballet, like philosophy, traces its roots back to kind of an obsession with mathematics. So, not very many people know this, but Descartes, one of the last things Descartes wrote was a libretto for a ballet, because ballets, the ballet technique, it's basically axiomatic. It's organized around uh, all the artistic possible ways of going on from a very few basic movements. And ballet as a performing art got its start trying to visualize mathematical harmony as it came to the early Renaissance through the translation, in particular, of the laws and the Timaeus. So it was a way of trying to visualize cosmic harmony in a way that could heal political and social.
Cosmic harmony, Timaeus, the laws, political harmony. Got it. So, so this long tradition that takes its inspiration from Plato, has a few high points, high watermarks in the modern period, but then now with this choreographer, Ratmansky. Tell me about this interpretive move and this reaching all the way back to Plato that we see there.
Yeah. So I mean, every time. So literally, ballet is born out of a Neoplatonic vision about how the body can visualize mathematically based cosmic harmony, and every time ballet as an art form has sort of had a crisis point, the really powerful choreographers, the choreographers who have been able to make dance that registers for contemporary audiences as deeply exciting and deeply pleasurable, have been looking back to this origin and thinking about, in various ways, the power that this technique, which was developed in order to turn the body into a better instrument for trying to help to not just picture the harmony, but help facilitate it. They have gone back to that history of ballet. So Balanchine Alexei Ratmansky is right now the resident choreographer for the New York City Ballet. The New York City Ballet was created by George Balanchine, who came to the United States as a refugee from the Bolshevik Revolution, and got really involved in trying to recreate ballet as an art form for an American, a democratic political body. And at the moment where he's creating his abstract ballets, he's looking back to that origin story. So he's taking off costumes in part as a way of revealing the structure of the body and allowing us to see its sort of mathematically based perfection. And Ratmansky in the current moment has been returning to so first he goes back to the symposium, right? And this is the symposium, as I understand it, one of the things that's really interesting about the symposium is it is a dramatization of the quarrel between philosophers, Socrates, and poets. And following Bernstein, Ratmansky basically choreographs a version of the symposium. So I say following Bernstein, so Bernstein has a piece called Serenade after Plato's Symposium. And Bernstein writes about turning Agathon's speech into the centerpiece. So taking the centerpiece of the symposium away from Socrates, giving it to the tragic poet who has just won the Dionysian festival, right? And so Ratmansky follows. He uses that music, and he follows this idea of Agathon as the center, but he makes a lot deeper contact with the ambitions of the symposium, as I understand them. So he turns Agathon not just into the centerpiece, but into the dancer, so the dancers, all of the speeches are translated into solos, except for Socrates, which is translated into a duet. But his solo is the solo that organizes all of the dancers together in the public square. There's this public square of light where the dancers have kind of been coming together and, falling apart, and the light's been flickering off and on. Agathon's solo is what really anchors that public square of light and organizes all the dancers into a conversation with each other in a sort of coherent way. So as I saw it, he's sort of reopening the ancient quarrel and inviting philosophy in. And I don't know whether, so my question is there a way for philosophy? So Symposium shows us sort of the vision of philosophy as a form of love that's embodied in conversation. And so my question is, does philosophy still care about conversation? And does it still see itself as in some way responsible for not just being a form of love, a love of knowledge, but a love of the human soul, and facilitating the hanging together of the human soul along with these art forms that are looking back and thinking about the power of art to facilitate that kind of hanging together at the individual level and at the social level.
So what's to be made then of Socrates' contribution being in the form of a duet?
Well, I think there's a lot to be made of it. One thing that I love about it is that, diatema, so Ratmansky transforms diatema into a presence at the Symposium. And when Socrates is describing what he learned from Socrates, instead of describing that, what we see is their duet with each other. And what seems very powerful to me about that is you see this duet between Socrates and Diatema, as I understand it, as I understand this figure, she's a really interesting figure herself, and she's tied to Dionysus and to the part of the god Dionysus, who was the patron of these small, intimate symposia gatherings, not just the large city of Dionysia festivals. And so Diatema, but here she's a woman in a point shoe. And so we have Socrates being led by the central kind of figure in this art form, and you see the philosopher and the ballerina and the point shoe dancing together. So I take this as a kind of transformation of this quarrel, so into a conversation that is a form of love between philosophy and the arts. So that's kind of the vision that I see it. So and in ballet, there's all this stuff in ballet about vision scenes, the way in which you envision what the goal is and what you're trying to realize. And it's taking us back to Plato, who also has his own very powerful vision scenes. Here's our what are we doing in philosophy? We're trying to envision here this ideal republic. So it's philosophy and the arts working together to get back or return to the priority of envisioning.
Yeah. And Plato has another dialogue, the Laws, that's another vision scene, I guess, of the second best city. And this in some ways is Plato being able to appreciate the role that dance plays as kind of civic education, civic bonding.
Everybody, so in the art, so one of the things is there's been a resurgence of interest in the Laws, and especially among dance scholars and scholars of ancient philosophy, but among dance scholars, because essentially this is a dialogue where instead of focusing on, as as in the Book 10 of the Republic, Plato is talking about perhaps banishing at least some artists from the Republic. Right here, he's arguing that everybody in this city, in this actual practical city, should be involved in dancing and in performing, in training, and then being involved in performances, because of the way that training brings the natural pleasures of the body into, the way it allows the rational capacity to shape the natural pleasures of the body and create a whole
and new sensitivities
person.
too,
Yeah,
and new
yeah,
sensitivities to other harmonies that otherwise would just be inaccessible to you. So your program is centered a good deal of aesthetics here. Is it would it be fair to say that your program of mending the gap between philosophy and art is in some ways a kind of an aesthetics as metaphilosophy?
I'm not exactly sure what you mean by that, but certainly my interest in the arts has made me interested in metaphilosophy because of some of the things that I said earlier about the way that the arts, when there was a real effort in the 70s and before with to bring attention to the arts back into philosophy, not attention to the arts so much as an object of philosophical reflection, but as an important interlocutor. So and I was really interested I wanted to see there being ways I was interested in ways that the arts could contribute to philosophy that went beyond finding in various artworks a kind of implicit argument or view. So one of the things that's really interesting to me about Plato, the example of Plato, is that Plato doesn't treat philosophy as entirely focused around the expression and support of, a utilitarian as opposed to a deontological view of this, or ways of distinguishing different views of things from each other. That's just not sort of at the centerpiece of what, and I think that's an important part of philosophy, but I don't want it to be everything that there is. And so what really interested me was that at the same time that all of these philosophers were turning to film or turning to literature and finding implicit views that could be explicated and support for those views, trying to see the works as doing that kind of philosophical work, there were people like Cora Diamond and Stanley Cavell who were looking at philosophers, at contemporary philosophers who don't use the research essay as their mode of philosophical writing. So the Investigations and its form of internal dialogue, or looking at Nietzsche, looking at these philosophers who have unusual literary forms and arguing that we can't understand what they're doing philosophically by treating those forms as kind of a container for the views that can be excavated. Right. So I wanted to take the work that was being done there to illuminate philosophers and incorporate it into my thinking about how the arts themselves might be able to contribute, what kind of philosophical work they might be able to do.
So one of the super interesting observations that I've gotten from you is this duality of in philosophy of art. On the one hand, we've got the of being it's the object of interest, but then we've got another kind of more compositional of, like made of, composed of. So philosophy of art then has sort of got sort of two faces then, given this. And there's one version of it that it sounds like you're significantly resisting, which is this. What you're doing is you've got a philosophical program, and you go and you look around in art and see what kinds of novels or paintings instantiate the picture that you're painting in your philosophy. But there's this other compositional of. Tell me about that duality and about how that manifests in the way that you approach aesthetics.
Okay, so as I understand the duality, so there's philosophy. There's philosophy of film, for example, or philosophy of literature, where the of is understood as a subjective genitive, and the way that philosophy is engaging is to give a philosophical account of. So, do you have a cognitivist or an emotivist view of literature? Right, so in that kind of work, which I think is very valuable, and some of that kind of work I do, in that kind of work, individual works of art are at best like data points, or they're examples, right? So if you want to give a cognitivist view of art and you want to incorporate attention to one particular novel, the role for that is to explain how this novel is a good example of a cognitivist.
Right.
It provides good support for a cognitivist approach, right? But so the other of is the of a subjective genitive, and that's where I think of the art, the work of art, as having some kind of overlap with the work of philosophy. And this is where I think there's kind of an ineliminable tension between philosophy and the arts, because I think what that work, so I don't think there are clear, there's a clear answer in advance to what does philosophy do, what do the arts do. So I think there's some overlap there, and sometimes the arts are doing what I would want to call some form of philosophical thinking or philosophical work. What I don't want to do is assume in advance that what's philosophically interesting, or what kind of philosophical work the art may be doing, is the philosophical work of expressing indirectly a view that a philosopher might express directly. So I don't want to limit the philosophical work that the arts can do if you're thinking of the of a philosophy of literature as a subjective of. So you're thinking about the philosophy that's internal to the individual works or internal to the art form. I don't want to limit that to, or assume in advance that we have to cash that out in terms of the views and arguments that the work might be understood to contain.
So then let's kind of close the loop. Let's kind of close the loop then, because the way that you started was with this attempt at articulating the bodily vision that shows up in a proof. And so there's one sense, again, this sort of a bunch of steps of inferences. Is there a way that you see that, or that original vision that you had still informing the work that you're doing now, that there's a kind of an aesthetic appreciation for things hanging together and there being a harmony of the parts that emerges in a proof step by step, but something that's seen and felt and maybe even performed, but in a different, but it looks like it would be different from just merely a proof.
I think it is. I mean, I'm not trying to say that I think that dance works are best understood as proofs.
Okay.
I think that proofs, but here's what it is. So I felt like the proof, what it was that I was able to see and to make visible. So I don't think of that as so I'm not thinking of what's being seen there as the theorem that's being proved in some ways. What's being seen is the conceptual connections that are illuminated by making, some proofs make the connections between the concepts in the premises and the concepts in the conclusion, right, differently than other proofs of exactly the same results. So I'm interested in the connections that can be seen and appreciated, the depth of the connections and the that can be seen. But I also, part of what I think I was experiencing when I was introduced into the conceptual world of abstract algebra, and I was so floored by its beauty, and I experienced that in such a physically powerful way, was that proof was drawing something out of me, right? And I see that as, going back to the symposium, right? If we're thinking about the philosophical work of conversation, is explicitly understood there as the work of drawing these new ideas, out of the interlocutors, and of them then taking on the responsibility of caring for the implications of those ideas together. So that's kind of, I see the work there as, so I guess to come full circle, that's kind of the way of thinking about, I think of the art of the arts and philosophy as each having their own version of that kind of work. And having to negotiate together about how to share the responsibility for drawing these thoughts out and caring for them together.
This makes me so interested in your classroom. So you teach a logic class. We'll start with a logic class because we kind of started the story here with a kind of appreciation for proof. Tell me about so the classes that you teach here at Vanderbilt. You teach a logic class, and then we'll kind of ask, and then the more specialized classes closer to your. Is this vision of things hanging together? Again, my class is very much like it's all steps. It's just steps.
Well, the steps are very important.
The steps matter.
The steps matter. I don't mean that the steps don't matter. But that is, so there are steps in ballet too, and those steps are steps that are taking off from and returning to these basic axiomatic movements, right? So I do see a powerful analogy. I know you have your own, your criticisms of analogical reasoning, but I see a powerful analog there. But I don't think they're the same kinds of processes.
Right.
But I emphasize in general logic, I sort of frame the class by telling the students, logic is about the systematic study of these forms of reasoning that hold together all these different parts of human life. You wake up in the morning, you go to probably before you've gotten to the cafeteria, you have made use of some of the most basic forms of inductive or deductive reasoning and deciding what to do. And these same forms are prominent in each of the individual sciences and mathematics. Aristotle identified them thousands of years ago. So these forms of reasoning, the fact that we share these forms of reasoning across different subsets of human concern, is one of the most fundamental ways in which we hang together.
So in this regard, logic is in some ways bringing that harmony into our lives in the way that we reason and the way that we make ourselves explicit to each other.
Yes. And I see it as a way of, I see all of I don't know how you see them, but I see these basic formal techniques that I'm teaching the students as ways of allowing them to get their thought out in a very clear way and be able to share it with others in, so that you can compare your thoughts together. You can have other people check your reasoning. So logic is something that we draw on, these formal techniques, when we really care about all the steps of our reasoning hanging together well and hanging together with the conclusions that others are coming to.
Yeah. And so now the other arc of this, you teach a philosophy of film class. And I presume that same duality of shows up in that classroom.
Oh yeah, no, I do. That's how I explained to the students at the beginning of the class that we're going to be tacking back and forth between philosophy of film, where the of is understood to be objective, and we're looking at philosophers who have developed theories about what film is and how it relates to the other arts. And we're going to be reading philosophers who have sought to explicitate the philosophical thinking in individual films. And these two things don't come apart, because how you understand what film is as an art form is going to inform what kind of thinking is going on in an individual film. So often, so I'm making it sound like we do tack back and forth between big theoretical level and these and days where we read philosophers developing detailed readings of individual films and seeking to explicate the philosophical thought in those films. And we sort of think about the relationship between those two forms of philosophical work.
That was going to be the question. Like, in what ways would the two approaches inform each other? Is there a way that, like, you become able to see patterns in the philosophy of film in the objective sense whenever you've got a deeper sensitivity for the subjective sense?
I think so. I mean, I think the most interesting philosophers who have been interested in art, and in here for me, Stanley Cavell is the central example, is the paradigm example of this, are always thinking in both ways at the same time. I mean, so Cavell thought and wrote a lot about the question of the relevance of intention for a work of art, but he's thinking about, he also recognizes ways in which films are thinking about, individual films, individual works are our best guide for thinking about this kind of question. One thing that came out of the philosophy of film class this time that I saw more clearly, it's something that I've seen before but really came to the fore in the discussions this time, was thinking about the concept of possibility. And this fascinates me because of its connection with logic and truth tables, right? So if you are going to try to, a truth table represents every possible way, every possible combination of truth values of components, and it tells you here are, and I've either got all the possibilities here or not, right? And that way of thinking about possibility has shaped the way that philosophers have thought about the possibilities of film as an art form, right? So they've tried to say, okay, there are these, we have an exhaustive set of the possibilities in advance, and we're going to see which possibilities get actualized in an individual film, right? So I don't think that way of thinking about possibility works very well. I don't think that the possibilities of an artistic medium can be understood exhaustively in advance in that way. And I think most people don't think that way anymore. But there's the question, what is it to be a possibility of an art form, and how do we think through the distinctive possibilities of this artistic medium? At the same time, many of the individual films that we're thinking about are asking questions about what are human possibilities, right? What are, what are the possibilities for my life? Or so it's kind of going back to this idea of envisioning. How do we envision what is possible,
And
socially or individually or scientifically?
yeah.
Um,
So this sounds like a really compelling class. So we've talked about some classes that you've offered here at Vanderbilt, but
Yeah.
I'm going to ask about a class that's kind of in the works for you, the skepticism on the page and the stage. You taught it at Mississippi State in the Honors College a while back, and tell me about what that looks like, and like what the plans for that, what the vision of that would look like.
So I taught that course once before, and I organized it around this question about literary form. So ways in which philosophers writing in different literary forms have been So when I say different literary forms, I mean Platonic dialogues, Descartes' meditations, more contemporary work on skepticism, right? So thinking about how reflection on skepticism on the page has always or has interacted with or coexisted with reflection about skepticism on the stage, right? So the way in which skepticism about what we can know or who we can trust gets worked out in a Shakespeare play, or skepticism. You see skepticism as a theme all over Greek tragedy, for example. So looking at the ways in which skepticism is explored and becomes a focal point for the arts in one way and for philosophy in another way. So it's kind of a variation on the theme that the arts and philosophy are going to have their own approaches to these very central questions about what we can know or who we can trust. And they're maybe going to have to work out tensions in their ways of thinking about how we best think through those basic questions.
And so, I guess one question here is like, is there an anti-skepticism on the stage? And like, it seems that like all the setup for Descartes' meditations is for the anti-skeptic to come in and the cogito argument comes swooping back in.
True.
I'm kind of curious. Is like there's some version of it where it's like skepticism is a kind of a climax, is maybe the climax. Whereas other versions of it, maybe skepticism is more like a kind of a tension builder, and then you've got somebody come in and save the day, and here's knowledge, and here's some certainties, or something like that.
That's a good question. It's not something that I explored the last time I taught the class.
Okay. The narrative arc of skeptics. Well, great, Kristin. Thanks so much for talking with me and talking about your arc into philosophy, your research, and the teaching. This has just been so delightful.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for taking the time to talk with me about it.
All right. And so next time.
All right.